so much of our communication with one another is nonverbal. And once you become aware of that and how the nervous system is always communicating with you, the nervous system of another person is always communicating with you. They don't have to do that verbally. And once you become aware of that, you can start to look for indicators of posture, of vocal tone, of eye movement that allow you to know when someone is maybe becoming dysregulated or dissociated, and when you're exceeding someone's window of tolerance. Hi, this is Elisabeth Kristof.
And Matt Bush, and you're listening to Expansive Intimacy with Jim Young.
Welcome to Expansive Intimacy. I'm your host, Jim Young, and I'm on a quest to help men like you and me discover how to apply intimacy to unlock new, expansive versions of success in your relationships, your work, and your life. With each episode, we'll take another deep dive into the intimacy toolkit to show you how you can enhance your emotional intelligence, leadership abilities, and relationship skills. So settle in and open up, because it's time to get intimate. Hey folks, welcome back to Expansive Intimacy. I'm your host, Jim Young. And in episodes 13 and 14 of the show, I had a phenomenal time talking to and learning from Elisabeth Kristof and Matt Bush, respectively, on how our brains and our bodies play critical roles in how we respond to the world around us, the stresses that we face, the challenges that we're trying to overcome, the dreams that we have, the relationships that we're in, the careers that we're building. And I decided I wanted to talk more with them. And in fact, what we did was we designed a panel episode. This is the first ever panel episode with two guests on the show. So it's going to sound mostly the same, but a couple of little tweaks. And we really dug into a deep vein here about how, as leaders, and with a bit of a focus on as male leaders, one of the big themes for this show, how we can be held back from practicing intimacy, practicing tools and techniques that help us connect with our real, actual, present situation. How we can be more conscious of what's going on for us and how that's affecting other people. This episode is loaded with tips for leaders to start identifying what's going on for people who they lead and how they might be held back, but also what might be going on inside of them that could be blocking them that they may not even be aware of. The episode focuses a lot on how we can have greater capacity, we can perform at our top level as leaders in ways that you might not expect. Now, in my experience, I've seen a lot of resistance for folks around ideas that get below the head. When we start to talk about our body and our physical experience and how that informs our actions and our behaviors, and it gets labeled as woo-woo or out there or something that's not for them. If you have any shred of that belief, I want you to just set that aside for just this one episode, for the next 40 minutes or so, and start to see if you can identify ways that what Matt, Elisabeth, and I talk about could actually open up the list of things that you want to be creating, for those things to happen in a much more integrated way, in a much more intimate way, in a way that feels incredibly successful for you. All right? Cool. Let's get on with our first ever panel episode. Elisabeth and Matt, welcome back onto the show. I'm super excited. I've never had a panel episode, so you get to break the seal on that. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having us. And Matt and I are quite used to speaking together. We do a lot of group recordings on Trauma Rewired, so this will be a good way to ease into this.
Yeah, thanks for having us back.
Yeah, for folks who are maybe dropping in and you're midstream on the podcast, Elisabeth and Matt joined us in some of the earlier episodes, I want to say episodes 13 and 14, talking about this field of work that they're involved in around how we can retrain our systems around trauma and around interactions that we have, where our brains and our bodies can be these huge assets for us in finding an easier path. So today we left so much on the table from our previous conversations, and I really wanted to dig in more. And today I wanted to hit on a core theme that we talk about on Expansive Intimacy, which is how do we bring intimate relationship skills, as I like to say, from the bedroom to the boardroom and beyond, taking this concept of intimacy and intimate connection and moving it out of just this narrow place and making space for it in other parts of our world. So we're going to explore that today in conversation. We don't necessarily know what's going to come up, but I would love to just get Matt and Elisabeth, both of your initial reactions when you think about that notion of intimacy bridging from bedroom to boardroom and beyond.
Sure, I'll jump in. I think that from a guy's perspective and my personal experience, thinking of boardroom and beyond, I go to career and I go to, the responsibility of running a company and working with a team or managing others. And there's maybe stereotypical, but it feels like there's an expectation, whether it's from myself or from the people around me, that I'm going to show up and be task oriented and, make progress or be productive. Almost show up and do your job kind of a mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is a challenge to bring intimacy to a situation like that. I've tried to step in and say, I really have to role model that if it's going to become real, if it's going to be there, I'm going to have to bring it. And kind of tying together what we do with nervous system work to this idea, it's like, if I'm going to show up and role model, I have to be able to maybe create some safe space or demonstrate some vulnerability or ask some deeper questions that are more than just surface level work oriented. It's kind of this idea of like, be more interested than interesting in those moments. But to do all of that, I think we really have to have a nervous system that's regulated, where we can maintain a level head or be safe ourselves to demonstrate some of that. It's hard to just flip a switch. We have to really make sure that the body and the nervous system are there to support us and to make that possible before we just kind of charge into it, guns blazing, trying to open up something that then we can't support or we can't fulfill.
One of the things I hear in there that I definitely want to come back to, but we're going to hop over to Elisabeth in a second, is that we have to find ways to slow things down.
Yeah.
How do we find those ways to slow things down so we can open up that space for different conversations?
Yeah.
So yeah, Elisabeth, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is a topic that's been a long process. Like you were saying, it's a slow unfolding for me. I certainly can't speak from a male perspective, but I do live in a nervous system that is definitely primed for protection. As someone that has quite a bit of developmental trauma, I feel like a lot of my life was spent really learning ways to protect myself with a lot of bracing. And there are a lot of parts of myself that were exiled and that I felt very uncomfortable allowing people to really see. And in the past few years in my business, I do a business now that I am speaking to mostly people with complex trauma and working in this world. And it requires me to share my experiential knowledge as well as my intellectual knowledge. There's a big difference in understanding all of these concepts, somatics and nervous system training, and really living them in your body and sharing that experience with other people that allows it to resonate in a different way. And so it's really important for me to be able to show up in the podcast or in my teachings with my whole self, to bring all of those parts into the light and to be able to talk openly about my experience. And as I was beginning to build this business, I would bump up against how difficult that was for my body. Quite frequently, I would go on a podcast or I would teach, and afterwards I would experience some pretty severe outputs of my nervous system, migraine or shutdown or inflammation, even a rash sometimes. And I knew I really wanted to do this and to carry this message, to be part of this conversation and to share my experience. And so I've had to do a lot of work with my nervous system in order for that to be possible, because I really want to connect to people in from the bedroom to the boardroom.
Yeah. And I hear, like, I've witnessed your gifts in our conversations, in listening to your show. I know how powerful your work is. And I can only imagine how many people who in their trauma responses are closing themselves off and not showing up with those gifts. And it makes me wonder, removing gender from the equation for the moment, at least, how is it as leaders, can we start to pay attention to and notice when somebody might not be able to show up? Because we're creating the container as leaders, right? What can we be looking for? If there's a leader out there who's listening, is like, okay, well, how do I know if somebody is not feeling safe enough to show up?
Well, I think one of the best things is to just begin to understand that so much of our communication with one another is nonverbal. And once you become aware of that and how the nervous system is always communicating with you, the nervous system of another person is always communicating with you. They don't have to do that verbally. And once you become aware of that, you can start to look for indicators of posture, of vocal tone, of eye movement that allow you to know when someone is maybe becoming dysregulated or dissociated, and when you're exceeding someone's window of tolerance or the minimum effective dose of something that allows them to stay present or not. And the more you understand about how our bodies and our nervous system function, the more you can read those signals at a level that's beyond what someone is necessarily saying to you.
What are some of the specific indicators? You talked about body posture or tone of voice. Like, what does it actually look like for somebody who's wanting to start mining for this information?
So a couple things you can watch for. First, as far as body posture, like flexed forward, kind of internally focused posture, rounded shoulders, head down, they're breaking eye contact. That posture is often associated with shame, and it's kind of a shutdown posture. So they're disconnecting from the conversation. And if someone's in that posture and you're still talking, you're no longer talking to them. You're now talking at them. So that's a really big one. The other thing is a kind of a break in the flow. I call it looking for blips, where you might be in a conversation and you're kind of flowing back and forth, but then there's a blip in the rhythm, like the speed of their response changes. Their vocal tone might change, meaning if they were talking in a nice, relaxed voice, but now their voice goes up higher, that's a big change. Normally, a higher tone in the voice indicates a little higher stress in the body. An unstressed or relaxed vocal box and body will have a lower register and lower tone of voice and more relaxed speaking rhythm. You can also look for changes in their breathing. This is a big one, but when people start to hold their breath or brace, this is especially noticeable in a standing posture. So if we're all standing around either in a break room or around the conference table, nobody's seated, you're not going to really see the down and in posture, unless someone's just staring at their shoes. But you will see changes in breathing rhythm where they start to tighten up, hold their breath, brace a little bit more through the chest and shoulders. And it's kind of like if you were imagining that there was an actual sparring match going on, they're bracing to get hit, to protect themselves and be able to take a blow and not crumble in front of it, So it may be a psychological or emotional fear or threat that's driving that, but it manifests in the physical body.
This tensing up of
Yeah. Elisabeth, would you want to add some more? Because I hit that at a very high level.
Yeah, I think those are all definitely some of the first go-tos. People's hands will clench up subconsciously. They'll, make a fist. And I notice that in myself sometimes. Sometimes my partner catches it in me when we'll be having a conversation and I'm talking like I'm fine, but I'm like, my hands are turning white. And eye contact, like Matt said, eye contact is a really huge thing. If someone can no longer make eye contact, definitely you've lost them. And doesn't have to be for long periods of time, but if they're unable to hold your gaze at all. And there was one other one I was thinking of, but those are some of the biggest ones that I would look for sure.
Those both connect deeply with my own experience. And I'm thinking about, I had a conversation with my partner yesterday where we were working through something that felt kind of challenging for us. And I noticed as we were sitting kind of across from each other on opposite ends of a couch, kind of, feet extended towards each other, that I was able to maintain eye contact in a conflict situation with my primary partner. And it felt easy for not necessarily the very first time, but this is new for me. And I know just in hearing you say that, like, oh yeah, I used to really have a hard time just staying physically connected with eye contact when conflict came up. It felt too scary, too dangerous for me. Something bad was going to happen and I was going to be wrong or shamed or bad. So everything you just shared, and I'm sure there's more markers and more signs. To me, it seems like it requires so much presence, so much consciousness. And so kind of to come back to what you were sharing in that first question, Matt, is like, how do we start to slow down so that we can catch all of this stimuli that's coming at us?
So I think it starts before you ever get into the boardroom. It's doing the daily work. Some of that is introspection and just being aware of your responses and normally we would say communication patterns, but maybe a better way to think of it is your self-protection patterns. Because how you communicate when everything is relaxed is one thing. Like you communicate with your friends or with your family when everybody's getting along. But when we get into a work situation, we often take on a little bit of a slightly different demeanor. And especially when there's high threat or high expectations, we'll often go into that kind of self-protective mode. So that's just the differentiator between those. But like becoming aware of those things, maybe that's through journaling, or maybe that's through introspective meditation, or just having some solitude and going, oh, I didn't handle that very well. Maybe I can try it differently next time. Or I noticed when, he or she said this, then I got triggered and I started thinking about blah, 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 blah. Like it's worth taking the time to go back and unpack those in a non-heated moment and try to understand yourself and your own reactions. Because with more understanding comes greater awareness in the moment. So that's a big part, but there's also where we come into the picture is training your nervous system on a daily basis. Just like you brush your teeth, probably twice a day, maybe more. You shower, you take care of your clothes, you take care of your hair. You need to take care of your nervous system in the same way, with daily hygiene and daily maintenance of your neural systems, so that they're able to receive and integrate all of these different sensory inputs that we're talking about. So you can pick up on the nonverbal communication, you can pick up on the posture, on the vocal tone, on the speed, on the emotional kind of nature of the situation. But if the way I describe it to my clients is I go, if your brain is so busy trying to figure out where am I, and I mean that in a very physical, literal sense, like where am I in the environment? Am I standing, seated, moving, related to gravity? Where am I? What's going on around me? Am I safe? And if that takes up all of your brain processing and resources, there isn't a whole lot left over to be aware or engaged with another individual.
Yeah.
Like it literally makes your brain self-centered because it's trying to keep up. with the physical and sensory inputs of the moment. So the daily nervous system training can help your brain to be more balanced and more able to integrate, so that when you get in a situation, you have more capacity, more available resources, more available brain processing to go, oh, I heard that change of tone, or I saw that change of movement, and I need to respond accordingly. Because if you don't see it, you're just going to like blow right past it or run right into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that daily practice is so important. And a lot of the reason that I am so committed to regular daily work with my nervous system is really to be a present person. I think that we can only meet other people as much as we can meet ourselves. And a lot of my life, I was living in a pretty dissociated state. And like you said, how do we slow down? Slowing down can feel really scary if you're used to being in an activated sympathetic nervous system state. And there's a lot of emotional stuff underneath the surface that busyness is distracting you from, and it's hard to process those emotions. And there was a real challenge for me, and that I see also with a lot of my clients, of being present, being in their body, living an embodied life. And I work with my nervous system daily to create the capacity to feel my internal sensations, to be able to slow down, to be able to feel the external sensations, and really be in the present moment without, getting thrust back into the past or getting stuck in a state that keeps me unavailable to myself and to other people. And it really was that, for me, the foundation of just making presence possible required working with my nervous system, not just in moments of dysregulation, but regularly, to have that capacity that Matt was talking about.
That makes so much sense, of course, that to be able to slow down in the moment, we have to have practiced it beforehand. We need to be doing it in the low stakes environment, so that when the stakes are high, it's muscle memory, it's second nature, and that we can do that.
One of the things that I teach my clients just as a practical tool, and for some, this might sound really elementary, but it's been really valuable, that the people who find themselves either dissociating, like Elizabeth was kind of talking about, and leaving the present moment, or kind of bowling over other people because they're unaware. What I teach them is, whenever you can think of it, just take a second and recognize 5 to 10 sensory inputs from your current environment, like right in the moment. Go, what's the temperature? Is the wind blowing? What's the lighting? What's the sound? What do I feel from tactile sensation? What do I feel inside my body? Is there any other like sensory thing that's happening that I was previously ignoring, right? Or just glossing over? And that quick awareness, that could take less than 10 seconds, right? To go boom, 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 boom. It really brings you back into the present moment, creating a little space from wherever your brain had wandered off from. Like maybe you were
whatever part of your brain you were wandering in, right?
Yeah, exactly. Your brain might have been in the past worrying about what had happened. It might be in the future. It might be thinking about a different conversation, but it brings you back to the present moment and connects you with your sensory systems. And practicing that over and over and over again gives you the opportunity for it to become a little bit more automatic, where you don't have to work at it so much when you're in the midst of a conversation and go, okay, I'm here. So it's a very simple, easy tool, but it's been really valuable.
And I want to come back to something you said, Matt, about stereotypical. We started off talking about men and what are some of the archetypes or stereotypes of men. And the book that I wrote that has the same name as this podcast, but has a subtitle, Expansive Intimacy, How Tough Guys Defeat Burnout. The reason I put that subtitle in, and Tough Guys has quotes around it, is that there's a perception of what it means as a man to be tough. And it's a bar that we're expected to clear. We're supposed to. We're supposed to be able to tough it out and handle whatever. And I put it in quotes because I think the old version of tough guy is kind of played out. The take it on the chin, suffer in silence, die at 55 of a heart attack. Like, that's not really tough. You're not helping out the people around you in that kind of scenario. The tough thing is to say, I am going to bring more people into the circle. I am going to recognize that there are traumas in me as well as other people. And this is a nut that I continue to try to crack, because I think there's such a strong social narrative for men around how they're supposed to be. And work like what we're talking about, I think, can feel threatening. It can feel unapproachable. And there's resistance to it. It's called woo woo. It's whatever, right? There's all these things that people, will throw labels on, like this, that's not for me. And I'm super curious, to help unpack the case for this. And you both talked about capacity or performance. That rings a bell for guys. What do you see as resistance to doing this work, whether it's among male identified people or other people who have a strong drive and are more logical, left brained? How do we get people to the table? What's, to your to a term you used, Elisabeth, minimum effective dose of a particular practice? What's the minimum effective dose for on-ramp to get somebody to open up to this work?
Well, I think one thing that's really important for people to just understand, and this is all people across the board, male or female, or anywhere in between, is that all of these things that that we're powering through, they're happening inside of our body, whether or not we like push through and don't react to something or get through a tough situation and pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and never really go through and process what was happening in our body. The stress response and the emotional response is physiological, and it is going on inside. And so a lot of times, unfortunately, what brings people to the work with me is that has been going on for so long that their body is now in a disease state. So they're experiencing really severe outputs like pain or disease or depression, burnout, big things that, because there weren't the tools or the awareness or the motivation to work with the system prior to that, it sometimes takes getting to that point for people. And I think that now there is a greater conversation going on. Nervous system and the stress effects on our body is becoming more recognized. And so I think people are starting to hear it more and recognize it in themselves a little bit more, and coming a little bit more open to working with their operating system, working with their nervous system, and they'll experience it. They'll feel what happens when they do some of these neural exercises. They'll feel how their body releases, how they can perform better, how they can lift a heavier weight or run a little bit faster. And then that kind of gets people's attention and they become willing to explore it.
Yeah, on the one side, there's just increasing people's awareness, which we try to do through podcasts like yours and our classes and social media and just getting the word out there. But I often bring it back to a micro scale of one individual person when I do get to meet with somebody, and I go, at the end of the day, sit down and do a journaling exercise of what do you want. Set a timer for 20 minutes, no restrictions. No limitations, no judgments, just write what you want. And I say 20 minutes because most people usually think they're done at about minute 4. They're like, yeah, that's all I can think about.
When I first did that, unprompted, it took me at least 4 minutes to think of one thing.
Yeah, the blank page syndrome is tough for me too, actually. So I have them go through that exercise and really just write what their heart's desires are, whatever that is. And there's a few steps, we'll basically go eliminate anything where you don't have agency that you can't control, and then go back and choose your priorities. But the follow-up question, which is really what's most important, is how you're showing up right now in the world, or what you're doing right now, going to get you those results. Mm-hmm. Because if not, then we're falling into that old definition of insanity of doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So it's almost holding up a mirror to go, yes, we've been raised with this cultural and societal expectation and this noise about how we're supposed to show up as guys. And you've tried that. Is it getting you where you want to be?
Yeah.
Or would you be willing to try something different? That the conversation of the mirror really opens up some guys like, okay, maybe I'll try something different. Others go, hell yeah, like please give me another option, because maybe they don't know anything else exists, right? And then some go, you know what, I'm good, I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing. They go, great, let me know if you ever want to change that.
Yeah.
But it's that introspection of going, do you really want to just keep following the same path, or might there be something out there that's a little bit more helpful or a little bit more enlightened about how the human brain and how our lives really work, so we can access this different level of being, different level of who we are as humans and how we interact together.
You
Yeah.
said, oh, go ahead, Elisabeth.
I was just going to say another really neat thing about working with the nervous system and using neurosomatic tools is that you don't necessarily have to be a believer. You don't have to think that it's going to work, and you just try the tools and they will work you if you're doing them. And so a lot of times people come in and they're just have enough willingness to try a little bit, and then they start to change. And that change is the catalyst for continuing on this work and going into deeper levels. I just did a training in Columbus, Ohio for first responders and police force. And I'll tell you, those guys came in very skeptical, didn't want to be there, very braced. And as we went through the 2-day training and did a lot of work with their nervous system, there was a massive shift without them consciously wanting that or deciding to open up. Just as their nervous system was rehabilitated and regulated, they started to open up and experience a new way of being inside of themselves. And then they were sharing. And by the end of the training, they were all super excited about it and really excited to have the opportunity to talk about all these things that had been going on inside. But they didn't have to come in that way. They just had to be willing to do a little bit of stimulus for their nervous system and then let the tools do the work from there.
That the experience of being in our bodies, and I've been working some new practices in my life recently where I learned the term interoceptive just several months ago, and realized like, oh, there's this way that we can feel what's happening inside of our bodies. And as somebody who has done lots of work, therapeutic work and coaching work and other experiential work, I had no idea the depth of what we have access to. And I guess I'm curious on that front. You described an experience where people came in, there was some skepticism. You started moving them through experiential practices where they got to see what was going on, feel what was going on with their bodies and their minds. And then that opened up dialogue, sort of I'm going to call it, quote unquote, the talk therapy part of the experience, perhaps. I'm curious how a modality like neurosomatic intelligence fits into a broader puzzle of the ways that we can, open ourselves up to a healthier life.
Well, I think first, we have to understand that so much of this is going on at the subconscious level. When we're talking about the parts of our brain and our nervous system that are driving our behavior in a way that we have no conscious awareness of. And so I can go to a therapy session or work with a high performance coach or a business coach. But if what we're doing is dysregulating my system and driving me into a freeze state or a flight state or any of these ways that I disconnect from my body, I might not be aware of what's happening, but I'm not able to absorb and integrate anything that is happening in that session. And if I do, muscle through and start to create these changes in my life and try to take new action, behave differently with my partner, or take big steps for my business, but I haven't brought my body and my nervous system on board with that, then I'm going to start to experience some real protective outputs of the system that is not feeling safe with those new actions, that new way of thinking. And so if I really want to be able to implement any of the work that I'm doing in personal development, it has to also include a foundation of working with my body and my nervous system and creating a safe container inside of me to bring those changes out into the world, or else at best, it's just not going to be sustainable and I'm not going to absorb anything. And at worst, I'm actually going to start to experience harm to my health and my behavior because I'm pushing myself into a really high stress state at the subconscious level.
Those protective mechanisms can also show up as self-sabotage or as sacrificing one part of life to have success somewhere else. Like with what Elisabeth was saying right at the end, I may find career success and I might make a lot of money or get the promotion, but at the expense of that self-awareness and my own physical health, and probably at the expense of my relationships, because I can't develop the intimacy to maintain the relationship. So it blows up, or it burns out, one of the two.
Yeah.
So if we want to have the holistic success that we're really talking about in this conversation, you have to bring your subconscious along, because it'll self-sabotage. Like I said, it'll try to self-regulate, sometimes through self-medicating, sometimes through binge eating or other behaviors. And we use the term protective outputs. But what we mean is some type of behavior that the nervous system is creating, probably from a subconscious driver, to help regulate itself or to protect itself. And most of the time, those are not helpful to the big picture. Those are behaviors that kind of get in our own way, or they don't serve a better future. They keep us stuck where we are, or repeating the same patterns on the hamster wheel, or in avoidance and dissociation, so that we don't ever have to deal with it. So yeah, you have to bring your subconscious, because it's the one who's making most of the decisions about how you show up in those relationships.
I love that. I was looking for the loop back to go from boardroom back to bedroom, and you just brought us there, Matt, if we switch our focus and we say, okay, I'm going to be really high performing at work, but we haven't done this baseline work so that our nervous system is regulated and that we can withstand the stress that goes with changing any behavior, as well as maintaining the status. And there's really never any status quo in our lives if we're present and we're awake and aware, is that our relationships are dynamic and our careers are dynamic and the world is dynamic. And so, bringing all of that online so that I can go to work and then I can also come back and I can have that important conversation with my kid or with my partner, and to be able to show up with intimacy in all those places is ultimately that's the goal I'm after personally. And I want everybody else to have that. I also just wanted to note something that I think I learned from one of you two on our previous episodes, the one-on-ones that we did, is that notion that this subconscious distraction that can get created for us that pulls us away from being present can sometimes not be what we expect, like pain. Like we might have this relationship with pain because our physical body, if we have this aching and this pain going on all the time, well, we don't have to deal with what's really going on. We don't have to deal with what the old story is that might have us feeling dysregulated all the time. And it might just be that tension is built up in our bodies over time because we haven't dealt with it as pain. This is a lot of my own exploration of, the topics that I've been discussing with you all. And I want to make sure I have that right, I guess, because that's something I've been thinking about. And I did an episode recently from the time we're recording this show about my own exploration of my pain and how it affects ultimately the relationships that I'm in and the way I show up in presence at work or not show up with presence in my work. So is that close to accurate?
Certainly a possibility. I don't think of what you're laying out there. I go, well, our brains are wicked smart, way smarter than our consciousness can really associate and make sense of sometimes. So our subconscious brain absolutely has the ability and the capacity to go, I don't want to deal with this over here, so I'm going to distract you and give you this thing over here to think about. And that could be pain, anxiety, depression, other mental or psychological issues, other physical issues like insomnia and fatigue could fall into that category. So, we would still put those in a category in our world called threat responses, where the threat of this, perhaps this is a relationship or a job or whatever, the threat of this is so great, I don't want to deal with it. So I'm going to avoid it by giving you these other things to distract you. And the trickiest part of that is that when our subconscious does those kinds of things, it doesn't like send us a memo and go, hey, I'm going to give you an out. I'm doing this on purpose. It just makes the thing happen. And then we think, well, crap, now I have to deal with this. And it just degrades our ability to be present and to handle all that stuff. So yeah, I think you have that right. Elisabeth, did you want to add any more to that?
Yeah, I think that repression is a wild thing to look at. And especially when we're talking about in terms of emotional experience and emotional expression, I think sometimes we don't, just like Matt was saying, it's not conscious at all, right? But there is such a high threat level associated in our subconscious with the experience of certain emotions, big emotions that can be very dysregulating and that we maybe experienced at a much earlier age when that experience was so dysregulating to the nervous system that it was quite literally life-threatening. It kicked into a survival threat. And so we learn to repress those emotions because there is no real separation between emotional regulation and nervous system dysregulation. It's all part of a physiological process. And so our system learns like, this is dangerous. It can disrupt my social connections, but it can also disrupt my internal state at such a big rate that it creates this level of chaos inside that is detrimental to my health. And so we move into these repression mechanisms, and those can be behaviors, but it can also certainly be pain. It could be binge eating. It could be a migraine. Rather than allowing the emotion to rise to the surface, especially if it's linked to earlier in life emotions that were very big and unprocessed. Our nervous system and our survival mind will drive us into all kinds of things to not have that come to the surface and face the emotional and nervous system dysregulation that can come with that.
That's that default wiring that you talk about a lot on your show, about how we rewire, what we're trying to rewire. As we close out, I would love to give you the opportunity to maybe share, like, if there's one thing that somebody who has listened to this and is like, I've never heard of this stuff before, and what's the first thing I could try in a moment or before a moment, just to give them a small taste. And then also I'd love for you, for each of you to share the work that you're doing and how people can find you if they're really interested in going deeper.
Well, I think Matt gave some really great starting places of feeling into sensory sensations around you. And I think also one of the best places to start is by working on your breath. So just practicing really simple breathing exercises like box breathing in for 4, pausing for 4, exhaling for 4, pausing for 4, and finding little ways to help give yourself some regulation, and then just starting to also cultivate the awareness. I mean, that is a huge first step, is to just begin to, after you've found yourself in a moment of emotional reactivity or shutdown or pain or binge eating or using substance, whatever it was that you were in that output, like what happened before? And were there any little subtle signals that your body was sending you prior to that you can start to look out for and start to cultivate that awareness, begin dialoguing with your nervous system a little bit. Oh, I'm getting a signal. What can I do now? Could I stop and do a box breath, or feel into the sensation, or rub my hands together, or take a walk, or do whatever it is that I know helps my nervous system, because I'm starting to understand before I'm way out there into the threat response or the behavior, that my system was alerting me to that prior, and begin to interrupt that just little by little. And the more we interrupt it, the easier it gets to interrupt it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
After the breath work, and I agree with Elisabeth, that's a great place to start. The box breathing is a great idea. I also have my clients do just long exhales, like 3 in a row. Make the exhale as long as you possibly can. That's a very calming exercise for the nervous system. After that stuff, I would try 1 or 2 very simple vision exercises. Our visual system takes in so much of the sensory information, and we can sometimes get kind of stuck into looking at the laptop, or looking at the phone. We get locked into this little box. So the 2 vision exercises I often give people is to be aware of your peripheral vision, right, which is everything you're not looking at. So if you just start to wiggle your fingers on each hand, and just extend your hands out to the side and open up and see, if I'm staring straight ahead, how far out can I see those moving fingers, right? And if I can get them out to like 90 degrees on each side, that's pretty good. Yeah. And just broaden that awareness. And then the second one is an eye circle. You hold your chin with one hand, you hold up a finger of the other hand out at arm's length, and you just move it in a giant circle, like going around the clock. And you just watch it with your eyes all the way around. You go one way and then you turn around and go around the circle the other way. So now we're moving the eyes out to the full range of motion that they're capable of, as a way to get them reconnected back to the nervous system and back to the environment. So the visual system is where I often go after breathing. And that's a super easy ones that you can do right before a meeting, or when you step into the restroom for a little privacy. That can make a huge difference.
And I know this is still the tip of the iceberg. So for folks who want to learn more and they want to know, okay, what could I do based on a practice like that? And what else is there? How are they going to find you?
Well,
go ahead, Elisabeth.
If you're a coach or a practitioner or therapist, and you want to bring some of this framework and these tools into working with your clients to really increase their capacity to be able to do all of the other good work that you're implementing with them, like we talked about, then neurosomaticintelligence.com is the certification course that both Matt and I teach, along with Melanie Weller, who's a vagus nerve expert. And we have future cohorts coming up next year, and just checking that out and starting to get on the email list is a great way to begin to bring this work into the work that you do. If you're an individual just looking to begin to train your nervous system, I have a site where we practice neurosomatic tools regularly, live and in community, and it's brainbase.com.
Next Level Neuro, my company, also has a training product that's now out for individuals, not so much for coaches, but for guys who might, or sorry, not guys, individuals who might want to put some neuro into their actual physical training. Right. So if you're physically active in the gym as an athlete, or just, as a recreational mover, we have a product out there called the Neurofunctional Strength Training product that teaches some of these neurological drills and how to implement them with your physical training practice. That's an online video course that you can find at nextlevelneuro.com.
Fantastic. We'll put links for all of those in the show notes. And Matt and Elisabeth, thanks again for coming on and helping us open up our awareness of all the different ways our complex systems can help us to expand intimacy, bedroom, boardroom, and beyond. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right. Thank you for joining in for another episode of this long-running conversation where we're exploring how intimacy can affect our lives in all sorts of positive ways, whether in our personal relationships, at work, with our friendships, and our parenting, and beyond. And with all that in mind, I have 2 questions for you before we wrap up. First, What's one thing you heard on today's episode that could help you start to expand the intimacy in your life? Either some kind of discovery you might do internally or some step you might take towards another person. Second, who's somebody that you thought of during today's episode, somebody who popped into your mind that maybe could benefit from hearing this conversation as well? Would you consider sharing the episode with them right now? Be a fantastic way to continue expanding intimacy to even more people. Lastly, I have a bunch of other resources available for folks who want to continue exploring intimacy, starting with my book, Expansive Intimacy, How Tough Guys Defeat Burnout. I have a bunch of other resources that I'd be happy to share with folks. Just reach out to me, jim@thecenteredcoach.com, and I'd be happy to help you on that path as well. I hope you'll be back next week for another episode of Expansive Intimacy.